I'm Kurt Wagner in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, WeWork rework. The company finally puts an official pause on its IPO plans. What changes need to be made before hitting the public markets? Plus, Tesla's delivery dream. Is it realistic, reaching, or a total distraction? We discuss how this could be a diversion from falling revenue numbers. And awaiting impeachment, why big tech in the United States could be hoping that President Trump's political problem could be their gain. But first, to our top story. It is official. WeWork is pulling the plug on its IPO, at least temporarily. The new co-CEOs of the office-based company say they want to focus on its core business before going public, which they still plan to do at some point in the future. Now, WeWork has been burning through cash. It's now planning thousands of job cuts and will put some of its businesses up for sale. Joining us to discuss, we have Wedbush analyst Dan Ives, and here in studio, Bloomberg Technology's Ellen Hewitt, who covers the company. Ellen, I want to start with you. This story has been evolving dramatically over the last few weeks. What is the latest from this morning?
As you said, it's official. The IPO is going to be put on hold. So they said this morning that they're going to be pulling the S1. That confirms a lot of the reporting that we've had in the last week or two, which is that the IPO is unlikely to happen in 2019, likely to be pushed until next year. So they're going to be spending the next few months with these new co-CEOs trying to show Wall Street, we're going to cut back on expenses. We're going to make changes at this company. It's no longer going to be a company with this wide variety of businesses alongside its main core business, which is renting out office space.
Now, was there any one specific moment you think that kind of gave the, officials there the idea that they should pull back on this plan?
I think it seemed pretty clear from the time last Tuesday when Adam Neumann, the CEO and co-founder, stepped down that there was going to be a lot of changes at the company. So all of a sudden, you have these two new leaders, people who were both WeWork insiders, but also had experience at other large companies outside, taking over. And immediately, I think observers, including myself, were thinking, how are they going to actually continue forward with their plan, as they had said earlier, to finish the IPO in 2019? There's just so much to get done. There's been such a change at the company, and they were already talking from that first day of new leadership about difficult decisions that they were going to have to make in order for the company to go forward. So I think we were not surprised to see that they're putting an official pause, as they called it, on their plans.
Yeah. Dan, I want to bring you in here. I know that obviously there were some other elements of this IPO. There was some credit financing, for example, that was supposedly going to come when the IPO happened. Can you give us a sense of where WeWork's financials are right now? I'm sure the company needs some money. What is the business like?
Yeah, I think right now, look, this has been a black eye, obviously, for WeWork, as well as the IPO market really putting a white flag, showing that investors are not going to buy some of these business models for frothier valuations, but it really hits on cash burn profitability. And that's why I think right now they're obviously going to have to go back from a financing perspective, figuring out sort of, next steps here is the fork in the road situation. But, as you've talked about, the first thing, they got to cut costs, divest some of the pieces, and ultimately really put this car back in the body shop until it comes out maybe healthier, for an IPO later this year into next year, if you think about best case 2020.
Now, I know that SoftBank is obviously heavily involved in this company right now. Dan, can you give us a sense of what their involvement might be moving forward? I know there's been talk of maybe them providing some of that capital to WeWork. What is SoftBank's role going to be?
Yeah, especially with Newman out. They're going to have to roll up the sleeves. It's going to be hands-on deck in terms of not just the financing piece, but just the business operations. Especially when you look at a lot of employees have joined WeWork with IPO, with some of the comp perspectives that now are at least temporarily off the table. So they're really going to need to make sure that the house is in order, look at the business model. And really right now what investors are seeing, and you start to see with Uber and Lyft, and obviously you've seen WeWork and others, Peloton, it's about profitability. Needs to be a path to profitability as risk starts to come off in this market. And it's a fork in the road situation for IPOs. You have the Zooms, the Beyond Meats, but WeWork continues to be the poster child for what ultimately is investors saying no more. in terms of these business models that lack profitability, at least a path.
Ellen, Dan mentioned path to profitability. You mentioned tough decisions that need to be made. What actually happens next at WeWork?
Yeah, so we've reported on some of the things that they've started to do, notably, and I think more of a symbolic gesture than anything else. The new co-CEOs said that the company wants to sell the $60 million Gulfstream jet that the company bought last year to help Adam Newman fly around and do travel for his job. That was something that obviously got a lot of headlines. $60 million, they're going to need more than that to keep going. They've also discussed selling several side businesses that they acquired in the last few years. That includes Meetup, Managed by Q, and Conductor. And there's also talk about job cuts. As we've reported, it seems like the company will probably cut maybe in the thousands of jobs. They currently have about 12,000 or 12,500 employees, so pretty serious. And so I think they're looking around to see where they can make changes. And we'll have to see if that comes in different parts of the business or maybe also some trimming in the main business as well.
Yeah, you mentioned job cuts. What does this do for morale? I mean, you have employees who just a few weeks ago, they were seeing a big payday on the horizon, and now all of a sudden the CEO's gone and their jobs may be on the line. What is the morale at the company? How do you move past something like this if you're WeWork?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a few people who are still there. Obviously, it's tough times. Like, you can't imagine how difficult it is to know that there are going to be these things coming ahead at your company and not knowing exactly where, or, just going through the change of the last 6 months. As you said, they really thought that the company was going to go full speed ahead to an IPO. I think for a lot of employees, they're reassessing how much they think their stock is worth. They're worried about their jobs. They're concerned about what might go forward. I think it's going to be really difficult, and I feel for them.
Yeah. Dan, one more for you here. What does this mean for the broader IPO market right now? When you see WeWork have these kinds of struggles, is this a signal for other companies out there that are thinking about IPOing? What do you take away from this from a big picture standpoint?
Yeah, big picture, it's been a black eye, no doubt, and for the broader market. But I think it also shows that the companies with the strong business models, profitability, with the secular trends, there's an appetite for those names. But the ones more frothier, that continue to have sort of issues, profitability as well as business models, investors, especially in this market, those are not names that are going to get through, and especially valuations that are not down rounds, right, from where they went private. So I think this is a shot across the bow from Wall Street to the Valley, especially on the private side, saying, look, we're not going to take some of those private valuations, and we're going to command valuations that we feel comfortable with. So I think this was, ultimately, I think a line in the sand was drawn here with WeWork, and I think we're going to see the ramifications for months and maybe years to come.
I assume that means we will be seeing you both back here very soon. That was Bloomberg's Ellen Hewitt. Thank you for joining us. And Dan Ives of Wedbush, you're actually sticking with us, so hang tight. We'll be back to you. After a tumultuous year, SoftBank Group is back where it started. In February, the Japanese company gave its stock a shot in the arm by announcing a $5.5 billion buyback. But its marquee investments have now dragged the share price down below where it was on February the 6th. SoftBank's been hurt by Uber's sagging valuation and, of course, as we just mentioned, WeWork's disastrous attempts to go public. Coming up, reality or reaching? Elon Musk tells staff that 100,000 deliveries is doable in this quarter. We discuss the numbers, due out later in the week, next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen to the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Can Tesla possibly set another vehicle deliveries record? Elon Musk seems to think so. But analysts are thinking this could just be talk in order to divert attention from the potential for a less flattering trend, which would be falling revenue. A revenue drop would be a downer for Musk, who told employees last week they have a, quote, shot to deliver more than 100,000 electric vehicles this quarter. Now to discuss, we're joined by Bloomberg's Dana Hull, who covers the company. Still with us is Dan Ives of Wedbush, who currently has a neutral rating on the company. Dana, I want to start with you. So we're hearing possibly record sales, and yet a revenue decline. How does that work exactly?
So it's all about the mix of cars. Tesla sells the Model 3, the Model S, and the Model X. And as the 3 has ramped up and is kind of taking the world by storm, the sales of the S and the X are falling. So the average transaction price is getting lower, and that could impact revenue quite a bit.
And so now we're learning some of this through an email that Elon Musk sent to employees last week. Tell us about that email.
Yeah, so the email last week, which was leaked immediately, said that it was Elon's email to employees saying that they have a shot at a record quarter of 100,000 deliveries. We should get those numbers of production and deliveries later this week, typically by October 3rd. But then today there was some chatter that they're close to it, but there might be some logistical issues. So we don't know exactly when we're going to get the numbers. The number to beat is 95,356. That's what they did in the second quarter.
Okay, so we're going to be looking for that. Dan, I want to bring you in here. Obviously, no company wants to report a revenue decline, but it seems like that might be particularly harmful for a company like Tesla. Why do you think that might be?
Right now, it's a tale of two cities, because you got to give them credit in terms of what they're seeing from demand from the disastrous 1Q, getting near the 100K units. But can they do it profitably? That's the key for investors here, especially going to 2020. So what you're seeing on the Model 3 is it's good news, but it's also bad news. And that's why right now it's a drum roll into profitability for Q4. Can they show profitability? What does it look like in terms of the picture for 2020? That's right now. Tesla is a glass half empty view in terms of the street.
Dana, I feel like we've talked about Tesla for a long time as kind of having a vision for getting these electric cars into as many, drivers as possible. How do you kind of weigh those when they are selling the cheaper model? That's kind of what the vision sounds like. So isn't that kind of the goal that they've had all along?
Well, sure. The goal is mass adoption of electric vehicles, but Tesla has been around for 16 years now. They IPO'd in 2010, and they have yet to show profitability for more than a couple of quarters here and there, and that's weighing on the shares. The stock is down 28% this year because profitability seems to be increasingly elusive.
Dana mentioned that 28% drop. What do you think Tesla has to do in order to kind of get things back on the right track here?
Well, I think first it's the P word, profitability. They need to show not just talk the talk, but walk the walk in terms of profitability going into next year. They also need to show sustainable demand in the U.S., some good news, what we've seen the last quarter or two, but they need to show that sustainably into 2020. And then fundamentally, it's really, there's a lot of sideshows going on in terms of robo-taxis, insurance, and other areas. It's more of a laser focus, and they need Musk to navigate through this near-term period. And that's really what investors need to see on the other side. Because until they see that, this is going to be a range-bound stock. And I think that's why, I think right now the bulls are not necessarily popping the champagne yet until they see what the profitability looks like in terms of earnings.
Dan, there are so many tech companies that really preach growth over profit, and I realize they're different business models, of course, but when you look at the Facebooks and Googles and Amazons that for so long have been able to sustain businesses simply by playing that growth card, is that something that Tesla could do a better job of doing, even if they're not going to reach profitability? Could they at least, play the growth up a little bit better than they are?
Look, the biggest difference there is that this is a CapEx model. So when you think about Giga 3 in Shanghai and other initiatives, that's part of the thing for what ultimately is a car company versus a software or tech company in terms of the multiple investors are willing to pay. Here, they need to show sustainable profitability, because otherwise then it's just going to be a capital raise every 18 to 24 months. That's why right now for Tesla, this has definitely been a step in the right direction, but it's one chapter in the book that continues to really be something that, has not necessarily turned the corner in terms of profitability. That's why investors treat them differently, as well as there's only one Bezos. There's only one Nadella. When you look at everything Musk has done, massively impressive, but ultimately as a stock, it needs to be about profitability, and that's the key of the valuation.
Dana, we talked about Elon in that email. He does a decent job of trying to instill confidence, obviously, with the rest of the company. If they do not hit that number that you mentioned earlier, what should we expect from Tesla in terms of kind of employee morale and just general, confidence in what they're doing?
I mean, if they don't hit the number, I'm sure that they'll be close, and there'll be some speculation as to how many vehicles are in transit. They'll talk about their logistics challenges. You know, this was the first quarter that they started delivering the Model 3 to companies like Australia. I mean, and they only make cars in California, so it is quite a feat to just get these cars on ships and get them where they need to go by the end of the quarter. But I think people are tiring of this kind of end of the quarter push. Like, why can't they get the logistics sorted out earlier in the quarter than in the final days?
Yeah, well, we will be looking for that number. Bloomberg's Dan Ahold, thank you for joining us. Dan Ives of Wedbush, you're sticking with us yet again. We'll be coming back to you in a bit. And also, sticking with Elon Musk, he continues to have his eyes on Mars. He's outlined plans for Starship. That's the next generation rocket his SpaceX company hopes to use to eventually take humans to the red planet. Now, Musk says the goal is to make space travel just like air travel. Coming up, antitrust overload. The U.S. Justice Department is launching its own Facebook probe. This, as the social network is already the focus of a Federal Trade Commission investigation. We'll discuss next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology. And be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Facebook continues to be in the spotlight on Capitol Hill. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission is already investigating the social media giant, but it won't stop there. U.S. Attorney General William Barr is pushing the Department of Justice to also start an investigation of its own. So will another antitrust probe actually make a difference in the way that Facebook operates? Still with us is Dan Ives, analyst at Wedbush, and in Washington, we have Bloomberg's Ben Brody, who covers tech lobbying. Now, Ben, I want to start with you. We've written about a lot of these different investigations. I believe there are now 4 separate antitrust investigations into Facebook. What does the DOJ offer something different than any of these others that might be going on?
Well, in a certain sense, another investigation can be marginal. You'll see things like these sort of Me Too subpoenas where DOJ will send something like, hey, send us all the documents that you've sent to FTC or state investigators or European investigators or the FTC investigators and the privacy claims, anything like that. So in a certain way that it's marginal, but in another way, it's that much more distraction. It takes executive time, it takes lawyers' time, and they could certainly pursue a different line of inquiry, which would be a whole other set of battle tools that basically Facebook would need to face if DOJ actually goes by this.
Now, Dan, you had a note recently, and you said that breaking up some of these big tech companies might be a tough argument to make. I'm curious why you think that might be.
Yeah, look, I go back to even when we covered Microsoft 20 years ago, in terms of that really case is key. In terms of antitrust and do they ultimately prove any sort of anti-competitor behavior? And we think that's going to be extremely difficult to prove. And even though there's going to be a lot of noise, a lot of headlines, we do believe this is something for Facebook, for Google, and ultimately, I think Apple's next in terms of the Beltway going after. It's going to be more fines and maybe some tweaks to the business models rather than pure antitrust, where we call it a breaking up of the business models. That continues to be how we navigate this for our investors.
Well, I was just going to ask, what's a more likely outcome of this if it's not an actual breakup? Do you think that they go after Facebook's ad business, for example? Is there another part of Facebook or these other tech companies that you think might be a lot more vulnerable than simply splitting them up? Well,
they're definitely going to obviously look at the unified messaging platform in terms of Facebook, especially on the Instagram, WhatsApp side. But I do believe that's also why I look at Facebook. They're aggressively going, after some of their strategic plans in terms of the next gen messaging platform, because I view it right now, a lot of these companies from Amazon, Facebook, Google, I think even Apple, they're learning from the mistakes that you go back to Microsoft and Gates. They really went on the defensive when antitrust was an issue and DOJ was going after them. They weren't as aggressive around mobile and some of the other initiatives, and it really hurt them for many years to come. So I think right now these companies are continuing on the offensive. You're seeing that on M&A. They're obviously going to significantly need the legal and other issues that are distractions, need to contain those. But I think it's more business model tweaks. Could look at the advertising side. I expect them on Apple to look at the App Store. But I think this is really, we're going to look out, call it 18, 24 months. The bark's a lot worse than the bite in terms of our opinion.
Now, Ben, Facebook, of course, is not really holding back. They're pushing into new industries, including cryptocurrency with Libra, as we've written a lot about. Do you think that any of that might actually pose challenges for them on the antitrust front?
Ostensibly, you have to think that their lawyers have looked at this really, really closely and, talked to the very top leadership and said, hey, we're under antitrust scrutiny. We have to do these by the book. We have to do them absolutely as carefully as possible. But if lawyers were always right, then there never would be any of these cases. And so I think that it's the kind of thing that the FTC, the DOJ, the states, and all of that are going to be looking at as it goes forward. I think particularly on Facebook, the acquisition strategy, how did you get so big? Buying Instagram, buying WhatsApp, these are key things that the enforcers are looking at. And so I think there's no question that they're going to be looking at the current acquisitions that are going on, and it's going to be a part of what they're looking at. Now, I think Dan is right. Antitrust has not necessarily shown it has an appetite to go after these kinds of companies, but that doesn't mean that it can't prove a very damaging distraction for them.
Yeah, and Ben, you, of course, are on the ground in D.C. What has the offensive push been like from these tech companies? And how has that maybe been a little different than what you've seen them doing in D.C. in years past?
Well, you have a whole different kind of set of defenses. So on the front end, Facebook is kind of what it always does. It likes to say that it's cooperating and it's finding solutions that work for everybody. If you look at a series of open records requests that we got here and a couple of other news outlets got just today, focused on Cambridge Analytica, this is the consumer protection side, on FTC, you see very aggressive lawyering. They're talking about violations of the 8th and 14th Amendment, due process, and unreasonable punishments, those sorts of things. You're also seeing very slowly, but surely, you're seeing defenders in various political camps starting to rise up and to echo some of these talking points. But just as surely, you're seeing people both on the Democrat and the Republican side really starting to come down on these companies. So the pressure's ramping up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for being here. That's Wedbush analyst Dan Ives and, of course, Bloomberg's Ben Brody. Thanks again, guys, for joining us. Coming up, speaking of Washington and tech, all eyes are on the Capitol, maybe on the impeachment inquiry of President Trump. Could this be what keeps antitrust regulators off big tech's back? We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Kurt Wagner in San Francisco. The U.S. Department of Justice, Federal Communications Commission, and attorneys general across the U.S. have all been keeping a close eye on big tech. There are possible probes and inquiries into companies like Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. There have also been calls from presidential hopefuls like Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders to break up some of these tech companies. But now, with all eyes on the impeachment inquiry into President Trump, can big tech breathe a sigh of relief? To discuss in New York, Bloomberg Technology's Eric Newcomer, who covers the intersection of tech and government, and Sally Hubbard, Director of Enforcement Strategy at the Open Markets Institute. Prior to that, Sally served as an Assistant Attorney General in the Antitrust Bureau of New York State. Thank you both for being here. Eric, I want to start with you. You wrote a great column on this idea last week. Give me a sense. Do you think that all of the distraction around this impeachment discussion could actually be a benefit to these tech companies?
I think in the short term, certainly in terms of the media environment, I mean, the fact is antitrust has become a political conversation, and that attention has animated a lot more action than we've seen for many years. And so when the story turns to impeachment, there is a degree to which, Facebook, Google, Amazon can, take a breath and sort of figure out their strategies. In the long run, these government officials know that the conversation will turn back to them and will keep working. But certainly for this moment, impeachment has sucked a lot of the oxygen out of the room.
Sally, what do you think here? Do you think that this is a lot of distraction just in the press and on the surface, or is this something that might actually help kind of behind the scenes?
I think it might affect the press and the coverage in the media, but I don't think it's going to affect the actual investigations. At this point, they're really in the hands of the antitrust worker bees, the staff attorneys who are working diligently, and the political decisions were already made. Those were the decisions to investigate. Now we are in the process of document requests and document review and depositions. All of that stuff takes time, and I don't think the impeachment is going to distract from the work that the attorneys are doing on the ground level.
There's a bunch of different investigations. There's obviously the attorneys general, there's the DOJ, the FTC. Sally, I'm curious, are any of those organizations perhaps more impacted by an impeachment process than others?
I would say DOJ would probably be the most impacted by an impeachment process, just because, there have been some implications of the Attorney General Barr could get wrapped up in that whole mess. So I think the DOJ potentially, but at the same time, we have the whole antitrust division that's staffed with antitrust career lawyers who are already, working away. So in terms of if there's any effect, the agency that would be most affected would be DOJ. I don't think state AGs or the FTC will feel any impact.
Eric, we've seen this play out, although it's been a while, with tech companies like Microsoft. I'm curious, what do you think this does from a distraction standpoint for a lot of these big tech companies? Is there anything that they can do to ensure that they're not totally derailed by something like this?
It just seems like they need to get their message right. I mean, certainly in sort of the media ecosystem, they just keep getting hit, one thing after another, whether it's sort of Apple's handling of its app store. They're just new stories one after another of where these companies have antitrust vulnerabilities. And so I think getting to a place where you have sort of a more positive message, if that's possible, would be the hope. And so this is a moment where they can sort of collect themselves. But, I totally agree that the actual investigation is happening, and that the fact that they got in this situation where they're such a target, now it's somewhat out of their hands.
Eric, you mentioned the App Store. We were talking before the break about the advertising opportunities that Facebook and Google have. I'm wondering, is there any particular market or any particular business line that you think might be the most vulnerable right now?
Well, I mean, Elizabeth Warren has been driving this conversation and put out a framework back in March, which really focuses on areas where tech companies compete with people on their platform. So if you're Google and selling ads, or you're Amazon and selling products against people in your marketplace, I think those are areas where she's focused on. But there's so much power in the technology industry, and now that it's a bipartisan issue where Republicans and Democrats are game to go after the tech companies, there are a lot of vulnerable areas here.
Sally, I'm wondering, for those of us who have not necessarily seen this play out as often as others, what are the actual next steps that people should expect? What is the government going to be doing that these tech companies are going to be seeing in the very near future?
Yeah, so the next steps are really reviewing some of the document requests. The state AGs have issued CIDs, which are basically subpoenas to the tech giants. Particularly, there's 50 state AGs who have joined together to investigate Google, and they've served CIDs, and 9 who are serving CIDs to Facebook. We've seen the House Judiciary Subcommittee issued extensive document requests. So right now it's going to be answering, producing those requests, producing documents that are responding to those requests, and then it's going to be millions of documents. So it's going to take time for the attorneys at all of these organizations and agencies to review it and to figure out where are the strongest claims that can be brought, and how can they build a case, or cases, I should say.
Yeah, Eric, I want to end with you here. I mean, we've talked a lot about Facebook and what they kind of just continue to push forward on things. We talked about their cryptocurrency. We've seen the push to in-home devices with cameras and speakers. Do you get any sense that the tech industry is actually slowing down based on any of these investigations, or is this just water under the bridge for them?
Well, I think Facebook's a unique example where Mark Zuckerberg has such control over that company, has really set the direction despite naysayers, and has been willing to say, we can't stop, we won't stop. And that's really been that company. I would expect something like an Apple or an Amazon has got to read the room and sort of decide, how they can seem and appear more cooperative to these impending agencies coming at them. So I do think Facebook has been a bit anomalous here.
Yeah, well, there will be a lot more coming on that, I'm sure. Sally Hubbard of the Open Markets Institute, and of course, Bloomberg's Eric Newcomer, thank you both for joining us. Now, sticking with government and tech, Apple has been denied tariff relief for its upcoming Mac Pro computer. The U.S. Trade Representative's office refused to grant a reprieve from 25% tariffs on parts for the Mac Pro. Now, this comes after the company announced it was keeping some assembly operations in the U.S., and President Trump took to Twitter to celebrate that last bit, saying, quote, "Great news. Apple announced that it is building its new Mac Pro in Texas. This means hundreds of American jobs in Austin and for suppliers across the country. Congratulations to the Apple team and their workers," end quote. Now, joining us to discuss, Bloomberg Tech's global executive editor, Tom Giles. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
I'm curious why the government would reprieve some of these taxes for Apple products. They gave a few reprievals, I believe, last week, and now they're saying no to these new products coming out of China. Why might some get the break and others wouldn't?
Sure. I mean, this is a case of Apple saying, we need a reprieve. We need you to exempt us from these tariffs on these 15 components that go into the Mac Pro, this high-end computer that Apple has been kind of putting together in Texas since 2013. It turns out that the government said in these 5 cases, you haven't made a case, you haven't proven to us that this will inflict substantial financial harm on you as a company, or words to that effect. And so they made the case with 10 of these components, they didn't with the 5 other ones. Basically this is a sense of you win some, you lose some. Clearly there was a victory insofar as Apple got 10 of them crossed off the list. Those are going to be exempt from these extra charges. Apple wants to convey to the government, look, we're in Texas, we've been there since 2013. We're going to stay there, at least in terms of final assembly on this one key high-end computer that we put together, high-margin computer. Here's the government being able to make it sound like they've scored a victory in kind of keeping Apple stateside.
And we saw the president congratulate Apple when they decided to keep production of this computer in Texas. When I see that, it makes me think that Apple might have been expecting that this would go in their favor. Do you think that the company was expecting that the government would do that?
Well, Apple has made it very clear, and they've signaled both, they've telegraphed to the government that we might shift production to China for this particular device, which hadn't been being produced or final produced in China for several years. They definitely telegraphed that to the government, like, don't mess with us too much. Also, Tim Cook has, he dines with the president. There were recent tweets about that. I think the president tweeted out a photo and certainly was talking about having had dinner with Tim Cook. We're not privy to what those conversations are, but you can imagine that when Tim Cook has an audience with the president, he's going to take that opportunity to remind him, hey, we'd like to stay in Texas. What can you do to, help us do that? Right. Help us help you.
And not all CEOs get, a dinner with the president, of course. Is Apple unique in getting these kinds of tariffs, or is this the kind of thing that's pretty broad in the tech industry?
So the government does make exemptions. I think this is the 3rd round. I was talking to my colleague Mark Niquette, who's the expert in this area. He said that Apple is not necessarily unique. There are other exemptions. He gave another example of another company on certain like paddle boards and things along those lines, or at least the oars used in kayaking devices. So it's not a complete anomaly, but not everybody gets an exemption.
Yeah. I'm wondering what you take from this long term. When you think about Apple, China, what does this signal coming down the line?
Well, I think the whole trade war between U.S. and China has really sent a signal to U.S. companies across the board that it's probably best in the long term not to be overly reliant on one particular region, one particular country, particularly one that, the U.S. can pick a fight with.
Yeah, it's a tough fight for sure. So thank you. That was Bloomberg's Tom Giles. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, how one workplace productivity platform is looking to keep employees from burning out. That's next. This is Bloomberg. On Wednesday, we learned of Dropbox's plans to become a competitor in the growing online marketplace productivity space, a move that puts it in even more direct competition with companies like Slack and Microsoft. Now, another player in that space is Asana. And earlier this summer, they launched their workload feature designed to help companies better manage their resources in today's shifting workspace. Now, joining us now for the latest installment of our Work Shifting series is Asana's head of business, Chris Farinacci. Chris, thank you for being here. I think the last time someone from Asana was here at Bloomberg Tech, they were talking a lot about notifications and how it can be very intrusive to try and get a lot of work done throughout the day while you're constantly being pinged. Tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing on that front and how you make a product that's meant to kind of avoid a lot of those issues.
Thanks for having me. So collaboration's killing us at work. Today, knowledge workers spend more time in emails and status meetings and messaging apps and being pinged by coworkers than they do on actual work, the work that actually rolls up to their job descriptions or goals. So Asana helps companies reduce the work about work and spend more time focused on the work that really matters. And our mission is to help companies and teams work together more effortlessly.
Yeah, I feel like one of my biggest complaints is that I have so many different services that are each doing one particular thing very well, but nothing that necessarily does everything very well. Yeah. So how do you feel about kind of an all-in-one product? What do you guys offer, and are you pushing towards that direction?
Yeah, so the way we see it, and really the way it's going down in the market, is sort of every high-performing team and every company needs the 3 C's of collaboration. There's communication tools like email and chat and video conferencing, things that help your employees connect and communicate. There's content tools that help employees create content together and share those files and attachments. And then there's coordination software. Coordination software helps organize teams so that everyone has real-time visibility on who's doing what, when, and why. Asana fits in this coordination space. We're a recognized leader there. And we've seen tremendous growth the last couple of years, and it's a testament to this growing business imperative around this coordination problem, helping reduce the time that people spend reacting to things and allowing them to spend more time on the things that matter.
I was going to ask you where you fit in. There are a lot of productivity, office, workplace services. We mentioned a few, Slack, Microsoft. Where does Asana kind of fit into the broader ecosystem?
So we're in that third space, the coordination space. So in the first space, communications, that's where you'd see Slack, Gmail, those kinds of tools. In that second space, content, that's where you'd see Microsoft, Dropbox, those kinds of tools. Coordination, that third space, is where we're a recognized leader.
I'm curious how your challenge has evolved as the workforce has gotten a lot more international. I know that at Bloomberg, for example, we have offices all around the world. That's tough for time zone. It's tough to coordinate. How do you guys try to solve that problem as more people are working from home and fewer people are coming into the office?
Yeah, so first off, we've really expanded quite a bit globally the last couple of years. We've seen tremendous growth. In fact, our growth rate has gone up as a company the last couple of years, so we're going faster as we get bigger. We now have 9 offices across the world, and we're serving customers in 195 different countries.
I can't let you go before I ask you, and I have to ask you an IPO question. We've been talking a lot about IPOs. You guys raised $50 million, I believe, about a year ago at a pretty lofty valuation. I'm curious, as you've seen, Slack go direct listing, if you've seen WeWork's struggles with an IPO, how has that changed maybe the way you guys are thinking about IPO?
Sure. So first of all, our primary focus is on making our customers successful and doing right by our customers. So like almost all of our focus is on product innovation, global expansion, and enterprise scale to help those customers. That being said, if an IPO or direct listing, might be in our future at some point in time, we see that as just another milestone on our way towards our mission of helping make our customers successful and helping as much of the world as possible get the benefits of work management.
Right. Well, we'll be watching from here. Thank you so much. That was Chris Farinacci of Asana. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, it's one of the biggest problems our planet faces, and technology might have the answers. We find out more about the cures for plastic pollution next. This is Bloomberg. Microsoft's largest reseller is planning an IPO. The Swiss tech firm Software One is planning the deal for the 4th quarter. Private equity firm KKR owns 25% of the company and intends to keep a significant stake after it goes public. Plastic. It's both a versatile product and an ecological nightmare. It's cheap, durable, and it won't rot. That might be great for shopping bags and containers, but it also means it sticks around for hundreds of years. Now, Bloomberg's Tom Gibson looks at how technology can help solve that problem.
Our addiction to plastic is catastrophic. Remnants of our products have spread to every corner of the planet. The properties that make plastic so useful, cheap, malleable, durable, also make it damaging. Plastic can't degrade, so the more we make, the more ends up in our environment.
What goes into your recycling bin at home, more than 80% is actually being landfilled or incinerated.
It pollutes the water we drink and the food we eat. It suffocates wildlife.
I don't think anybody anticipated the real problems that plastics were causing.
But innovative companies around the world are working towards a solution.
We are producing biodegradable packaging. Our packaging are made out of cassava starch and natural fiber together. It takes 6 to 12 months to decompose depending on the environment.
The cassava crop plays a major role in the Thai economy. It's not a staple food crop, but it's produced in vast amounts for animal feed and making things like starch.
The cassava is very easy to grow. You can grow all year round and in a lot of area in Thailand. My product can tolerate the temperature from -20 to 100 degrees. So with the hot food or with the boiling water, we still can contain that in our packaging. Our material can work as an insulation. It keeps the temperature of the food warmer longer than the other material.
The company, Universal Biopack, say they make around 100,000 items a month, mainly for hotels and restaurants with environmental concerns. Compared to plastic, their products aren't as malleable or durable and are at least twice as expensive. But using packaging like this could reduce the amount of single-use plastics we consume. So either these kinds of solutions will have to become cheaper to compete with plastic, or consumers will have to make a difficult choice.
Now our products are more expensive, but definitely it's better for the environment. People will have to think different way. Right now, if you pay for the plastic, you pay for only the cost of making the plastic. You don't pay for the cost of making the plastic go away because the plastic stay like 450 years.
On the other side of the world, a company is working on just that.
We need to find alternatives to burying our waste into the earth. Plastic Energy takes waste plastic that can't be recycled today and converts it into usable oils.
One of the biggest problems with plastics is how many different kinds there are. The majority of it can't actually be recycled, and many products use a mix of materials, which makes it even harder to recycle. Plastic Energy is targeting these problematic plastics using technology called thermal anaerobic conversion. The company heats the plastic to 400 degrees Celsius in a system without oxygen. The plastic waste breaks down into an oil similar to petroleum extracted from the earth.
For every ton of plastic that we process, we produce around 700 litres of oil.
By converting plastic into a base oil, Plastic Energy is creating a virgin substance that can be used in many more products.
Some of those oils can be used to make plastic again, or can be used to make commodity fuels. We can keep moving plastic waste into our facility through our process using our technology to produce the oils to produce plastics again, and that's a continual process. It doesn't have that finite life.
This circular economy could prevent more being made from fossil fuels in the first place. Companies like Plastic Energy and UBP have different ideas about how to tackle the plastic crisis. But what they share is a vision of the world where our throwaway culture is buried for good.
That was Bloomberg's Tom Gibson. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.